different types of misinformation are effective at different levels. The most effective type of misinformation is something that has at least a little bit of truth in it. Preferably a lot of truth that you can kind of just frame in a different manner to kind of get people to look at it from a different perspective. So this video that I want to talk about is a bit of a doozy because it is obviously made by someone who is intelligent.
If you'll remember, Hillary Clinton told Joe Biden not to concede.
Hillary told Biden not to concede. That sounds pretty bad, and it makes it seem pretty legitimate that Trump is now not conceding. However, the major point of what Hillary was saying was that Biden should not concede the night of. Biden is kind of overall a go along to get along sort of guy. He seems that way at least. And for that reason, he seems like the kind of guy who would immediately concede to have unity. He is an economic Republican, and he is super in love with bipartisanship. Biden is not the candidate who really got people excited for a great future. Instead, it was, oh, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do this. I'm not as bad as that. And even when he was questioned on things that could be considered more liberal or progressive or anything that actually was about a policy that would help the American people, Biden was like, no, I'm not going to do that. Don't call me a socialist. Please don't call me a socialist. And it's like, come on, we need to stop being afraid of words. And if he's going to have any chance, he needs to actually do some things that would help the American people. If Trump had taken COVID seriously and had helped the American people with stimulus, to continue to make it through all the lockdowns through this winter that is going to be difficult, then he would have likely. But my point is, I'm not trying to just attack him. He's going to be around, and he's going to be an important force in politics for a while. It is whether Republicans as a whole are going to demand that he goes along with our norms and values, or whether they're going to support this unusual challenge to democracy. There are people who have tried to steal votes as such, and they've been caught because our system is good at that.
2 times in our history, presidents did not concede the election. Why? Well, not because they were trying to be rambunctious, but just like Al Gore, they knew that something was off, and they were not ready to give up a fight.
Al Gore, he immediately conceded when it was looking a certain way, and then it was discovered that there were some issues. So then Al Gore decided to recant his concession speech.
Once a president concedes, the battle is over. There's no more legal fighting. There's nothing. Everything after that just sort of happens with a rubber stamp.
The lawsuits can continue even after a concession speech. So really, the main thing that a concession speech is good for is to assure the American public that democracy is still alive, that it still exists, that it is something that we can be proud of and hold dear.
It's called a concession speech. We've been doing it for a long time, but there's no law that requires a concession speech. However, it does aid in the peaceful transfer of power.
We are at a point in time where a lot of our laws are not truly laws, they're really norms. And it took somebody who didn't care about the norms to come in and expose where we really should have laws to protect our democracy.
The president has legal options to go to court to prove irregularities. So let's just say that none of that works, and the president still will not concede the election. The Constitution, Amendment 12 of the United States Constitution, gives you the answer of what will happen.
So let's talk about the largest allegation that this gentleman makes. And that is that the 12th Amendment basically makes it so that either party can throw out the will of the people. People who want to call themselves strict constitutionalists, they need to be aware that Amendment 12 was not created to allow you to throw out legal votes. The early founders, they wanted to make sure that the country would continue on smoothly, and they wanted to come up with a way to break a tie, or something that is close to a tie, statistically close to a tie, where if one candidate does not get the majority of the electoral votes, there's another way to determine who is going to continue on. This Amendment 12 is actually supposed to be used as a fail-safe. Maybe there is some sort of fraud. Amendment 12 does give you a way to rectify that in an extreme circumstance. But just because there's a way to use the Amendment 12 does not mean that that is what it was intended to do. So if there is a constitutionalist who is claiming that it is okay at all to use Amendment 12 to throw out legal votes or to make the election essentially not matter, then they are not being honest and sticking with what the founders originally wanted. Unfortunately, we have experienced more than one election where the winner of the popular vote did not become president. That points to some basic issues with our electoral system that we are going to have to deal with, because people in power aren't going to magically get better in the future. There's been corruption that goes along with power ever since the dawn of time. Mitch McConnell said that it's crazy that that Democrats are getting upset after not accepting the results of Trump's election. And it sounds like a good argument, because there are many people who felt like that the Electoral College victory was unfair because the popular vote was very different. But that is very different from actually blocking the president-elect from coming into the White House. Hillary Clinton took an extra day after she lost to come out and do the concession speech, but she did it. And then a day after that, Obama had him in the White House getting that information, because while right now might feel like a very politically vacuous time, it's actually incredibly crucial, because switching an administration that is in charge of such an important country when it comes to our economic impact and our military impact in the entire world, the incoming president needs that information. So to the Republican senators who have said, well, what's the problem in humoring him? What's the problem in just letting this play out a little longer? That's the problem. That is the big problem, is that we're in a pandemic. And maybe it wouldn't matter as much if politics were the way they used to be when I was younger, when it used to be totally optional to know anything about it or care. Well, it seemed that way to me. The more that I learned, the more that I realized that was just my perception, and things have been pretty intense since the beginning of time. But now our literal lives depend on the next administration's ability to decide how we can fight this pandemic. And there's more than one way to do it. You know, lockdowns have been fought against so much in this country, but if we had just given our citizens stimulus during the lockdown, problem solved. We really should look at Canada for what they've been doing. They've been giving $2,000 to people to stay home, and they have seen it as a good thing because it's fighting the pandemic. When we had a little extra money for unemployment, we had big business go, oh no, we might lose these employees. What if they want to stay home instead of work? That should not have been the focus. The focus should not have been, we want them to work. The focus should have been, let's deal with the pandemic and let's make it so that these citizens who are dealing with it through no fault of their own are able to survive it and get back on their feet. That should really be what a government is for at the end of the day, to protect you from invading enemies and invading viruses, and to help you make it through issues that the entire country is facing together. So this idea that the Democrats are just trying to lock things down and not give stimulus, I'd be fighting against that too.
It's happened 2 times in history. It happened in 1800. It's happened in 1824.
An example of somebody who won the popular vote but lost the Electoral College, you might be thinking about Trump versus Hillary, and that is true. Rutherford Hayes and Tilden, they went up against each other, and Tilden won the popular vote, but Hayes won the Electoral College by 1 Electoral College vote. And it still went to Hayes. Now, an example of a time where the Electoral College was completely thrown out the window is with John Adams and Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, he won the Electoral College, and John Adams managed to get the victory. Now, John Adams is an interesting president because not only did he get that victory that wasn't really fair, he also did not give a concession speech. But what he did do was he called his opponent and he basically conceded in private. And that was where concession speeches started, around that era. And as time went on, they became the norm. They became what was expected. And it has become an incredibly positive tradition. You can't expect people to follow a norm before it happens. So the idea that this is totally normal, that this has happened before, is misleading. Very much so.
At that moment, a Republican Congress will officially, constitutionally vote in the next president. Why do you think Donald Trump has not conceded?
Is it possible for us to lose our democracy? Unfortunately, yes. And the people who see that as an electoral win, the people who are willing to let the will of the people go out the window, who just say, hey, this is great for conservatives, this is great for Republicans, because we want Trump to win come hell or high water. But no, you should want democracy to win come hell or high water. Who the president is, it matters very, very, very much. But we have it change. We have a continual evaluation by the people to be able to get a new administration in if their current administration fails them. And the fact of the matter is, the Trump administration has failed the people, just simply in the COVID response. By politicizing a pandemic, it has made people unwilling to even do the basic things like wear a mask to protect themselves and others.
Then the electors get together, they cast their votes in Washington, D.C. The president is officially elected and the votes are certified.
So is it possible for these electors to change their vote and actually change this particular election? Well, 30 states have laws that require electors to vote for their assigned candidate, protecting democracy. There are other states that have penalties for electors that go against their mandate to vote for the candidate that they were assigned. These electors are called faithless electors, and if they do behave in that manner, then they can be penalized and they can also be removed from their duties in the future. And there have been faithless electors before, over 100 actually. Now, is it possible for this to muddy the waters and make it way more complicated? Absolutely. And for somebody whose ultimate goal is to force the vote into the House, that is a great way to muddy the waters, because the only way to have Amendment 12 kick in, other than this tie, which it was originally intended to deal with, is to muddy the election. And that's pretty tragic, that it is possible to have enough confusion for democracy to be subverted. It is possible, but it is highly unlikely.
At that moment, the election becomes obsolete, and now the president will be elected by the Congress, the House of Representatives. Now, immediately, that strikes fear in the heart of a conservative, because guess who controls the House? The Democrats.
The fact of the matter is, even if you took every single cured ballot and just threw it in the garbage, it still wouldn't be enough to change the results of the election. And even if you could flip Georgia, that wouldn't be enough either. That's just one state. The difference in votes across this election is actually huge. It just doesn't feel that way because it took so long to comb through all the mail-in ballots, and so they trickled in so slow, it kind of seemed like they just weren't legitimate at all. Trump told his followers that the pandemic is not a big deal, at best, at worst that it's a hoax, and so it was actually expected that Trump supporters would vote day of, and then the mail-in ballots would be the people who are concerned about the pandemic. A lot of these stories are being thrown out to muddy the water, but even if you go ahead and say, all right, let's take these ballots out and throw them away, it's still not enough. That's probably why Lindsey Graham went ahead and called Georgia, called the Secretary of State, and said, hey, is it possible for you to throw out like an entire district or an entire city where there is a higher rate of signatures that don't match, and use the failure of the signatures to match in that area to throw out other ballots where the signatures do match? This Secretary of State is actually a Republican, and he came out and he said that he felt that Lindsey Graham was pressuring him to figure out a way to get rid of perfectly legal ballots. Now, Lindsey Graham says no, that I was just trying to figure out what the rules for signature verification were. It's up to you to decide what you think is more likely. But if we look at Michigan, in Wayne County, the two Republicans said no, they didn't want to certify the ballots. And the two Democrats said, no, we certify the ballots. That's the way democracy works. That's the thing that we're going to do. And then, there was a certain level of outrage of people who were like, man, why in the world would you refuse to certify? And then there was also a surprising outpouring of people who were supporting that idea, who were actually excited about the idea of throwing out legal ballots. Now, that's the thing that concerns me the most about this election, is we're framing it so much about the battle between the candidates that we're not actually recognizing that this battle is taking place within the framework of democracy. And the framework of democracy is the number one most important thing. And then after that, your candidates battling it out, that is important as well. But candidates, they change. Potentially every 4 years, at least every 8 years. It's not a good reason to want to throw out legal ballots. I think everybody wants to count all the legal ballots, but we're just identifying what legal ballots are in a slightly different way. So the counties that have a higher rate of signatures that don't match, they tend to be poorer areas. And unfortunately, the country that we live in has a huge wealth gap between families of color and white families. And so it does target communities of color pretty effectively if you could throw out the entire community's ballots just because there's a higher rate of signatures mismatching. So that would be completely unfair. It would throw out legal ballots. The Wayne County officials, they ended up changing their mind and going, nope, we're going to go ahead and certify. Well, after they did certify, apparently Trump gave those Republicans a phone call. And the Republicans claim that he did not threaten them at all, but they also, one woman said that Trump asked how she was doing with all the death threats and the doxing. And the fact of the matter is, if Trump decides somebody is person non grata, they're getting death threats. It's the culture that he has encouraged. So this sort of pressure, even though it's not like a true threat, it certainly could be perceived as one. I'm not sure exactly why they changed their mind, but these Republicans came back out and said, no, we take it back. We don't want to certify. Luckily, it's too late to do that. You can't just certify and then change your mind. So why does this even matter? If I am so convinced that this is not going to actually play out the way that people are warning us that it might play out, why does this matter at all? Well, right now, the pandemic that we are in is a crisis unlike anything we have seen hit this country in a solid century at least. And whoever is going to be coming into office needs to at least have the basic information about our pandemic response. In fact, we're hearing that Trump hasn't even been going to the COVID briefings. So, in my opinion, we can all breathe a little easier just to have anybody who takes it seriously. But let's just assume that he has the greatest plan in the world. Well, he needs to share it with the incoming administration, or it would be worthless. And if all of this time has been spent to come up with such an amazing warp speed program, then we want Biden to be able to carry it out. And the only way he can carry it out is if Trump allows him to basically get his foot in the door. But these are big decisions that are going to impact every single person's life in this country, and we're still bombing people. I mean, come on, spend this money on American citizens. Let's take care of people inside the country for once before we try and export any more democracy.